press record. Somebody has to become the record monitor to remind me at the beginning of every class that I should record. I always forget. I'm going to put a shared screen. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, yes. We start off before we even talk about what Mishlei, what Proverbs is, about who wrote Proverbs, about what it's all about. We have to talk about a thing called Tanakh. You've all heard of the word Tanakh. What Tanakh is, it is the 3 sections of the 24 books of the Torah, of the Bible. The first section, the Torah, is Torah. For some of you, this is obvious and apparent. For others, it is, you learned it once and you forgot it. For others, this is not something that is so clear. I'm going to spend a few minutes now just clarifying exactly what Tanakh is. The first of the 5 books of the Torah. That's the Torah. The Nun, the Na, is the Nevi'im, the prophets. And the Ch is the Ketuvim, the writings. Each one of the books was written by someone else. The 5 books of the Torah, Bereshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, Bereshit's creation of the world until going down to Egypt, Shmos, exile in Egypt until Exodus, and the building of the getting of the Torah and the building of the tabernacle, Vayikra, the laws of sanctification and sacrifices, Bamidbar, the stories of what happened to the Jews in the desert, and Devarim, Deuteronomy, is the repetition and preparation for entering into the land of Israel. That's the quick view of the Torah. All of those 5 books were written by Moshe Rabbeinu. Without going into detail, these were the word of God to Moshe Rabbeinu. Happens to be the book of Devarim, is different than the other 4, but that's not for now. Then we get into the books of the prophets. Joshua, Yoshua, was written by Joshua, who took the Jews into the land of Israel. And Joshua was the one who took over from Moshe. That covers the first years of the settling, the conquest, and then of the living in the land of Israel. Shoftim, Judges, was a period of a few hundred years that was covered by, that in each generation, there was another judge that led the Jewish people. We did not yet have a king. The judge led the Jewish people. That was written, the book of Joshua was written by Joshua. The book of Shoftim was written by Shmuel Hanavi, Samuel the prophet. Then the book of Samuel, which covers King David, and that was written by Shmuel Hanavi, also Samuel the prophet. Malachim, Kings. Now, when you look in your Tanakhs, you will see Samuel is a Samuel 1 and Samuel 2. It's one book called Samuel. The Christians split it into 2 books, Samuel 1, Samuel 2, and that landed on us. The same as the chapters, by the way. Chapters, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, is not our designations, not Jewish designations. This was done outside of Judaism. We accepted it, though, because they're not bad designations. So we use that, Perek Aleph, Perek Beis, Perek Gimel, chapter 1, chapter 2, but that's not really the way we break things down. So Samuel is the book of Samuel, Malachim, Kings, the book of Kings. That's from Solomon all the way through until the destruction of the temple. Then you have the book of the prophet Jeremiah, written by Jeremiah. Yeshayahu, Isaiah, written not by Isaiah, but by Chizkiyahu, who was one of the kings of Israel, and his assistants. It was the son-in-law, actually, of Yeshayahu. Then the book of Ezekiel, which was written by the men of the Great Assembly. I'm not going to go into who they were right now, but I will tell you a time period from the time of the destruction of the first temple until the building of the second temple. That's the men of the Great Assembly. Then you have Treasar, the 12 minor prophets. That is all the Nevi'im. Those are the prophets of the Jewish people. Then the final section of the Torah is Kesuvim, the writings. Tehillim, Psalms written by David HaMelech, and 10 elders. When we say who wrote the book of Psalms, we say King David. King David was the editor-in-chief of the book of Psalms. Adam wrote some of the Psalms. Abraham wrote some of the Psalms. Moses wrote some of the Psalms. There were people later. The children of Korach wrote some of the Psalms. Psalms were written by different people, edited all and put together by David HaMelech. Eov, the book of Job, great discussion as to who wrote the book of Job and was Job Jewish. There is much discussion in the rabbis that Job was in fact not a Jewish person. And we assume that Job lived later, like in the time of the prophets. According to many, Job lived in the time of Pharaoh and Moses in Egypt. When we finish Mishlei, in about 30 years, then we'll get on to the book of Job. Okay, Mishlei, Proverbs, right now, written by King Solomon. I will get into that more later because it says over here, transcribed by Chizkiyahu and his assistants. We have to discuss that. But it's one of the books of King Solomon. Daniel, the book of Daniel, was written by the men of the Great Assembly. Daniel lived in the time after the destruction of the first temple. He was also someone who was involved in the story of Esther. He had a different name in the book of Esther, but he was in the book of Esther. He was the famous story with Daniel in the lion's den. And then Ezra and Nehemiah, who were in the time in between the destruction of the first temple and the second temple, and they were responsible for keeping Judaism going and then ultimately rebuilding the second temple. Divrei HaYomim, which is called Chronicles, which was written by them, Ezra and Nehemiah, some say by the men of the Great Assembly. Divrei HaYomim is a recap of the Torah, from the very beginning of the Torah until the destruction of the first temple. Then you have the 5 Megillos, the 5 scrolls. Megillas Rus was about Ruth, written by Shmuel Hanavi. Megillas Esther, the book of Esther, which was written by the men of the Great Assembly. Megillas Echo, which is Lamentations, read on Tisha B'Av, written by Jeremiah. If you've ever read the book of the Lamentations, it's an incredibly painful book about the destruction of a temple. And do you know when it was written? 18 years before the destruction of the temple. It was written as a prophecy, not as a history, which just makes it even more incredible. Then the book of Koheles, which we're going to discuss more in a few minutes. Koheles, called Ecclesiastes, written by Shlomo. And Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, also written by King Solomon. So King Solomon wrote 3 books: Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, Koheles, Ecclesiastes, and the book of Mishlei, Proverbs. That is the overview of the Tanakh, of what Tanakh is. Very briefly, what are these 3 books? Okay, very briefly, what are these 3 books of that Shlomo Melech wrote? That's going to be an important piece to the introduction that we're going to try to give tonight to understand exactly what the book of Mishlei is. First of all, the book of Mishlei, in its most simple way, is Proverbs. Proverbs meaning Mishalim, examples, that King Solomon wrote to make us understand how a person makes intelligent everyday decisions which maximize the long-term pleasure and minimize long-term pain. Basically, the book of Mishlei, in a nutshell, is how to live like a human being in this world, how to make decisions in this world, how to understand the world, how to live a life of righteousness. But let me explain the word righteousness. Whenever we hear that word righteousness, we assume that what we're talking about is, religious. Righteousness means it actually has nothing to do with the number of mitzvos that are done. It has to do with the attitude that a person has to life, with living life, a meaningful life, a full life, living life in a righteous kind of way, in a truthful kind of way. And that's, in a nutshell, I'm going to go over this many times, but that's what the book of Mishlei is. Why does it have to be written in the terms of Proverbs? So I'll give you a few examples. I could tell you that I would like you to be a certain way. This is the way you should be. And I could lay it out and clear. This is the right way to be. Or I can say it in the guise of a story or of a metaphor, in some kind of parable. The message that I tell you is going to stick with you in a way that it is never going to be forgotten. I will give you an example. If I were to tell you that be careful living in the exile, living in the times that we live in now, don't trust the non-Jewish world, because it will turn on you and destroy you in a moment. Okay, you got it. You got it. Move on. Okay, but I'm going to tell you that message in a different way. I'm going to tell you a story. There was a group of men that were on a boat, and the boat capsized, and they were thrown into the sea. And there they were flailing around in the sea, worried that they were going to die. And they saw in the distance an island, and they swam with all their strength to the island. They pulled themselves up onto the island, and there, while they were on that island, they looked for a way to sustain themselves. They found twigs and branches, and they were able to build a fire. Then they looked around for berries and for fruits to eat. They took care of themselves. They warmed up with the fire from the wetness from the ocean. They started to settle down. And as they started to settle and accept the fact that they were living on this island, suddenly the island turned and it pitched them back into the water, and they realized they were on the back of a fish. This story was told by a rabbi called Rabbi Bar Chana. It's told in the Talmud. It is recorded as a serious story. There are 16 stories that he told over. This is one of those 16 stories. And you wonder, what was he smoking? What are you talking about? Back of a fish? And the fish pitches and throws you back into the water? Because it's a metaphor. The ocean, that's gullus, that's exile. We were flailing in exile. We were drowning. And then we saw a place that we could call home. And we swam to that place. And we started to make ourselves comfortable. And that place that we called home is called Germany. It's called Poland. It's called Spain. It's called Portugal. It's called America. And then as soon as we started to get comfortable and we started to take care of ourselves and we found food and we found drink and we found comfort, what happened? Pogroms. It was turned upside down and we got thrown right back into the sea. And when I tell it to you that way, that sticks in your mind. That makes an impression in the head and it makes an impression in the heart. I'll give you another one. I tell you that don't make yourself great by belittling other people. That's a cheap high. You push others down. You make yourself great. That's cheap. You got that? That's a good lesson. It's a good message. Let me tell you a story. There were two kids who were fighting. There was a great rabbi that was looking out his window and he saw this fight between these two kids. And then he sees one of the kids throw the other one into a ditch. And he's jumping up and down. He wonders what's going on. He calls the kid over and he says, what were you guys fighting about? Oh, he says, we were fighting about who's greater than the other. He said he was greater than me, and I said that I was greater than him. So I threw him in a ditch. And then I became bigger than him. I became taller than him. And the rabbi looks at him and he could have just said to him, Tatala, you can't throw people in ditches. You can't do that. And he could have told that to him and then he would have gotten the message across. He said to him, Tatala, there was another way to do that. You could have stood up on a chair and you would have been taller than him. In other words, you could have made yourself great. You didn't have to throw him in a ditch. You could have made yourself great and you would have been bigger. You didn't have to make him small to make you bigger. Now, when that kid heard that, that made an impression in his heart and made an impression in his mind. So that lesson was a lesson that became an eternal lesson that he was never going to forget. That's what the book of Mishlei is. The book of Mishlei is ultimately all about understanding ourselves, understanding our lives, what motivates us, what should motivate us, how to fix our character. I'll go into this more next week, but how to fix our character and to turn ourselves into the fabulous people that we could be. But it's not just sitting there and wagging a finger at us and saying, you're a bunch of skunks. You don't behave this way. You don't act this way. You don't do this way. That's wrong. That's not the way the Mishlei talks. Mishlei talks in mashalim, in examples, in messages, in beautiful metaphors. It talks about fools and wise people. It talks about enticements, and it talks about women, and it talks about all kinds of things that are in our lives that we can then relate to. Shlomo HaMelech wrote 3,000 mishalim. Chizkiah and his retinue took those and condensed them into the book of Mishlei. The book of Mishlei is long. And I will tell you, though, that you all know the book of Mishlei. There's something from the book of Mishlei that everybody here knows. I think everybody here knows. Anybody know what I'm referring to? It's something that in many Jewish homes, we actually recite every Shabbat. That's from the book of Mishlei, from the end of the book of Mishlei. And that is a classic example of what the book of Mishlei is. Because when you read that, you say to yourself, what? A woman of valor, who could find? And you expect to find in there. She shops very nicely. She wakes up early in the morning and she buys a good field. Like, what are you talking about? Because nothing in that poem is the way it seems. First of all, I have to tell you, do you know who that poem is about? It's not about a Jewish woman. Did I shock you? Shlomo HaMelech wrote it about God, the Torah, the Jewish people, or the soul. But he used the Jewish woman as the metaphor because that was the greatest praise of the Jewish woman. That's the praise of Eishes Chayil. That I want to tell you about your soul, and what terms am I going to put it in? I'm going to put it in the terms of a Jewish woman, because that's the most exalted thing that we have in Judaism. And that's how you can understand the exalted nature of a soul, the exalted nature of the Jewish people, the exalted nature of God. I'll give you.
So I have a question, Rabbi.
Sure.
So aren't we actually, by using it every Shabbat, aren't we making it smaller than what it is? Because you're taking it from God and you singing it for your wife. So you're kind of like making it smaller than what it is.
So I'm telling you an interesting thing. There was, in my circles, we used to, at weddings, a lot of times we would sing Eishes Chayil. After like the first dance, And but before the bride and groom would go and sit in their seats, they would sing Eshes Chayil. And then it turned into this like love song. The groom would get down on one knee and he would sing, Eshes Chayil to his new bride. And if he had a good voice, he would embellish it. And we started to realize that's wrong. It's minimizing, like you're saying, it's minimizing the Eshes Chayil. We don't sing the Eshes Chayil as a direct praise of a Jewish woman. In other words, there's not a love song that a husband sings to his wife. It's not a way of saying thank you for the chicken. That's not Eshes Chayil. Yeah, Eshes Chayil is saying to a Jewish woman that you are the most exalted thing because you are the vehicle that is being used to describe God, the Jewish people, Torah, and the soul. That's really, 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 and we didn't know that.
Can you repeat it, Rabbi, please?
Say it again.
Can you repeat the last thing you
Yes,
said?
that Eshes Chayil is ultimately all about praising either God or the soul or the Jewish people, or the Torah. But it's put in terms of a Jewish woman. And when it's put in terms of a Jewish woman, that becomes the greatest praise. That she was chosen by King Solomon to be the metaphor, to be the example, the paradigm of these exalted things. That means that she herself is exalted. Okay, that's the way we're supposed to approach the Eshes Chayil. It's not a love song. It's not a love song. I'll tell you another thing. Shir HaShirim, which is also written by King Solomon. Song of Songs. Yeah, so if you read the Song of Songs, it's 4 chapters. A lot of people say it before Shabbos. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. And it's a conversation really between God, the Jewish people, and the nations of the world. And it's God's love for the Jewish people. But it reads like an erotic love song. Body parts are mentioned, breasts are mentioned, lips, the kisses of your lips are mentioned. And it could be taken, whoa, mamish in the wrong way. As a matter of fact, I once was invited into somebody's house and they showed me around their art collection. And their art collection was a series of pictures, erotic pictures, with verses of Shir HaShirim, of Song of Songs, as the lines through the thing. It threw me for a loop because forget about the fact that these were disgusting pictures, but that's not what Shir HaShirim is. When it talks about breasts, for example, in Shir HaShirim, it's talking about the rabbis, the sages, because it's talking about taking care of and sustaining the Jewish people. Like a mother sustains her child, so do the rabbis, the teachers of Torah, sustain the generation. When we talk about the kisses of the lips, we're talking about the eternal connection between God and the Jewish people, and between the Jewish people and Torah. In other words, but it's using words that we could relate to. That's the way Shlomo Melech wrote in his life. Okay. But now we have to discuss the 3 books that Shlomo Melech wrote. He wrote, and we'll end with this lesson, but it's a beautiful lesson. King Solomon wrote the book of Mishlei, Proverbs, Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, and Koheles, Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is read on Sukkot, 12 chapters. It is depressing. Depressing. King Solomon talks in there about that he's lived a life and he realizes everything is Hevel Havalim. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. All the material gains, all the material things, you're just wasting your time. And it just sounds like an old man who's lived his life and he's a little frustrated with where he is now. And he realizes that he wasted so much time in his life, and he throws his hands up and he says, humbug, it was all nothing. I worked myself to the bone for what? For nothing. That's what the book sounds like. It's not that, actually. It's King Solomon realizing that there is only one essential thing in this world, and that is spirituality, that is living for a purpose and a gain. And he was the richest, smartest, most powerful person in the world. He been there, done that, understood everything, and understood that it was all, don't live your life for that. Live your life for real things. Don't waste your time on acquisitions. Spend time with your family. Don't waste your time in acquisitions. Spend time with your soul. Spend time with your spouse. Spend time with your life. Don't waste your time on other things. And Shlomo Melech understood this. So the question, of course, is, I have to throw in one more fact, which I don't know if anybody here knows. When we say King Solomon, we know that that was the son of King David, second king of the Jewish people, third if you count King Saul, but second king of the Davidic line. King Solomon, there's a difference of opinion amongst the rabbis as to whether he died King Solomon or not. The Torah says you're not allowed to have too many wives as a king. King Solomon said, because the Torah says, because you're going to end up with idolatry. King Solomon said, I'm never going to end up worshiping idols. And he married more wives than he was supposed to. And because of that, idolatry was brought into his house and his kingdom dissolved. Dissolved. Most people don't know this. Now, the question is whether he got it back at the end of his life or not. And there are two opinions. One says that he died with his staff and his coat, and that was it. That's all he had left to his name. Others say that he became king again. Okay, no matter which way you understand it, what was the order of the writing of these three books? And you'll see why this is important in a moment. The rabbis say, everybody agrees, that Koheles, Ecclesiastes, the book where he says everything is a waste of time, all material acquisitions are a waste of time, everybody agrees that that was the last book that he wrote. The question is whether Shir HaShirim was written first, Song of Songs, or Mishlei Proverbs was written first. Many of our rabbis say that the proper order is Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, because that's the song of a young, hot-blooded person who is a passionate person, and that's the way he saw life. Mishlei, Proverbs, is more rational, more of a person whose life is settled and can look at life and see it for what it is. And then Koheles, Ecclesiastes, that sounds like at the end of life. And that was the order of the way King Solomon wrote his books. But there's only one small problem. Rashi seems to indicate, and I'll give you the Hebrew words, but I'll translate them. Nira be'enai, it appears to me that she'omru, that Koheles was said besof chayov, at the end of his life. That Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, was said at the end of his life. Now, Rashi can't just say that. None of the earlier rabbis say that that was the last thing he wrote. How could Rashi argue with the Talmud? How could Rashi argue with the earlier sages and say that he wrote Shir HaShirim at the end of his life? Because if you look very carefully, you'll notice Rashi didn't say that he wrote it. What Rashi said, Nemra, it was said at the end of his life. Rashi's teaching us an incredible lesson. Throughout King Solomon's life, no matter how much difficulty he went through, no matter the trials and the tribulations of his life, King Solomon always had a song of songs on his lips. He always understood what life was all about, and he was always optimistic and hopeful. And even when he said, Hakol hevel avolim, everything is just emptiness and nothingness, but that's just a realistic view of life. But life is awesome. Life is amazing. King Solomon had the ability to be able to look at fools and say, stay away from fools. Grab onto wisdom. Love wisdom. Teach wisdom to your children. But he had this incredible ability to be able to recognize the joy of life. No matter how realistic we're going to be about ourselves, we always have to be filled with the joy and the excitement and the passion of life. And that's ultimately what King Solomon teaches us. What King Solomon teaches us is that you have to have an honest view of life. That's what Mishlei is. You have to have an honest view of who you are. You have to have an honest view of the value of things in this world. You've got to think. You've got to look at yourself. You've got to introspect. but you got to do it with joy. You got to do it with happiness. You got to do it with satisfaction and with a sense of of accomplishment and a sense of purpose. If you look at yourself too carefully and too seriously, you could end up destroying yourself. Mishlei could be dangerous. When you look at when we start to uncover who we really are and what our motivations are, it could be dangerous. But it could also be empowering. It depends on what our attitude is. And what Rashi is teaching me, that King Solomon's attitude was optimism and hope throughout his life. No matter how he worked on himself, no matter how he built himself, he understood what life was all about, and therefore he was able to be hopeful and positive in the face of disappointment with life, disappointment with ourselves, and disappointment with others. Because he had a view on the big picture. And that's what Mishlei is, a view of the big picture of life. This is only one piece of the introduction. Yeah, that's it for tonight. Next week.
Like we should always look at the big picture.
Always look at the big picture, because when you look at the big picture, everything looks different. Everything looks different. I'll tell you one. I told the story last time. I'm going to tell it again, because we need to hear it. You remember the story I told 2 weeks ago about the guy who goes to his rabbi, and he says to his rabbi, my life is terrible. If this problem, and the rabbi says, "Oh, I'll pray for you," and he makes it better. And then one time he goes to the rabbi, and he knocks on the door, and nobody answers. Knocks, and he finds out the rabbi died, and he has this great complaint against the rabbi. I need you now. My cow died. My cow, my source of livelihood, everything I had in the world, it died, and you're not here to help me. That night he goes to sleep, and he sees his rabbi, and he says to his rabbi in his dream, "You let me down. I needed you now. I needed you to pray for me. I needed you to help me, and you're not there." The rabbi said, he says to the rabbi, "Can you pray for me now? You're like up there. It's a local call. Can you pray for me?" So the rabbi says, "No." The guy says, "What? No?" He says, "Yeah. See, when I was down on earth and you would tell me that something happened to you, like your cow died or something, that was like such a big tragedy. But now that I'm up here and I see the big picture, now it looks very different. And it looks different, and it's not the tragedy you think it is. It's part of a much bigger picture. When we look through the keyhole, we see just a small slice. Famous thing a mashal that I give. You're walking down the street, and you hear screams coming from behind the door. "No, don't, no. And you look through the keyhole, and you see a person with a knife over another person, and it looks like they're going to hurt them. You grab the door handle, and you flip open the door. You're going to save them. And you walk into a dentist's office, and it's a dentist over a patient about to actually save their lives, because they're going to take rotten teeth out of their mouth. And what looked like a terrible tragedy when all you did was look out of that little peephole becomes completely different when you see the big picture. The way to remain calm and to keep happy in life is to see the big picture. And that's what Shlomo Melech is going to teach us, how to see the big picture. Okay, I don't see everybody, but I do see Becky Krinsky raise their hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to tell you that I feel that it's important to see the big picture and to understand that the little things that they're not important in the big picture, they keep you focused and they keep you human. So the same way that more that you were saying that Eshet Chayil, it's about God and the relationship with God. I believe that if we understand that, we put it into the face of a woman, we can relate to them. So when hard things happen to us in life, even though yes, there's a bigger picture and up there it looks different, well, those little things keep you focused and remind you that you're still human and that you still feel, and this is pain, and you have to endure both. I don't think that you cannot dismiss one or the other, because when you're in suffering and you're in pain, it's real, and it's
Correct.
very real.
Correct.
And
I don't disagree with you. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. You know, today is Tu B'Shvat. I'll leave you with a Tu B'Shvat thought. It's Tu B'Shvat in Israel. It's going to be Tu B'Shvat very soon by you. But I'll leave you with one Tu B'Shvat thought. There was once a rabbi who, on Tu B'Shvat, was eating the fruits of Israel. He picked up an olive. And he took the olive and he started to wipe off the oil from the olive. And he wanted to eat a dry olive. And his students didn't understand why he was wiping off the oil. Because when you talk in metaphoric terms, the olive itself is something that our rabbis say, and a dry olive is what's called kosher l'shikha. It can make you forget. How that works is some Kabbalistic idea. Doesn't matter, but it can make you forget. Oil is a symbol of chachma, a symbol of wisdom. The whole Hanukkah story is based on oil because it's all about wisdom. When Mashiach comes, Mashiach's coming from the Mount of Olives and then into the Temple Mount, because the Mount of Olives is wisdom and the Temple Mount is spirituality. First he has to go for the wisdom, then into spirituality. Oil is a symbol of wisdom. So they couldn't understand why was he wiping off the oil to eat a dry olive when a dry olive is not really a good thing. So he said, the dry olive is kosher l'shikha, right? It makes you forget. He said, sometimes forgetting is a good thing. He said, because sometimes if you don't forget, you can't move forward. We all know that we've fallen down. We all know that there's pain in our lives, pain from our own disappointments, pain from disappointment of ourselves, that we've let ourselves down. Everybody's got a pain they have to deal with. But if you dwell on that pain, then you're never going to move forward. And at some point, you got to eat the olive. At some point, you got to forget. And when you forget, then you can start to move yourself forward. You're not ignoring the fact that you've fallen. You're not ignoring the pain, but you're just saying, I'm not going to dwell on this. I'm going to put it in the past. At some point, I will understand it or deal with it. But now I got to keep my life moving forward. So I think that's a healthy way of integrating both, of seeing big picture and of also recognizing the small details. At some point, those small details, though, have to be pushed aside so that we can move our lives forward and that we can actually see that big picture and realize the place that those small details had in our lives, and that they were painful, they were difficult, but they were there just to get us the big picture. Okay, just my thought. Okay, ladies, it has been an absolute pleasure and really, really wonderful to see everybody. And Mirza Hashem next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I want to say
Good
one last
night.
thing. I want to say one last thing.
Thank you.
Because-
Happy to be.
Thank you.
Happy to I just wanted to say one last thing. The studying of a text, we haven't even gotten to the text. We're still studying ideas, but the studying of a text is it's a little bit of a different kind of study. So I just suggest that hang on as long as you can. Hang on for a couple of weeks. Give it a shot in understanding of how this is. We'll get into a rhythm, and when we get into a rhythm, so then look, it's not for you. It's not for you. Don't worry about it. I'm not insulted, but this way, just give it a shot to get into the rhythm before you decide. Nah, this is not for me. Okay, amazing.
Thank you.
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Thank you. Happy to be.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.